The U.S. government outlawed that practice back in 1954, but several churches across the country appear to have violated that law. The topic is part of a new Texas Tribune-Pro Publica investigation. Joining us right now is Jeremy Schwartz, one of the reporters on the story. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So in your report, you give some examples of endorsements in the church. Can you share what you found?
Yeah, well, we found actually about 18 churches in recent months that appear to have endorsed specific candidates from the pulpit during sermons, which tax law experts told us violates the prohibition on that, which is more commonly known as the Johnson Amendment. And it appears from what we are finding that these endorsements are becoming more aggressive, at times more brazen, and apparently more common.
And Jeremy, let's talk enforcement. So the IRS has enforcement responsibility in these cases. What, though, can the agency do? Has it done anything yet?
The agency really has an amazingly light touch when it comes to this. It has only revoked the tax-exempt status of one church that we know about in about 70 years. It at one point used to send warning letters to churches fairly regularly, but in the last 10 years or so has really said very little about what they do, if anything, and have given sort of mixed messages to churches.
Okay, and so we mentioned before Congress outlawed the practice back in 1954. That was part of that Johnson Amendment that you talked about. That amendment has its roots in the Cold War. Can you explain what that connection is?
Well, at the time during the 50s, there were several House committees that were investigating the role of nonprofits in American elections, at the time, they were more going after foundations that were considered promoters of un-American activities, of communist activities. And so that was sort of the atmosphere when LBJ put forward this prohibition. At the same time, Johnson did have a couple of conservative foundations that were getting involved in his primary campaign. So there has been the belief that he also may have been trying to sort of weaken some of those foundations that were going after him. What we do know is that Johnson never mentioned churches when he came up with this prohibition, and it's unclear sort of how much the role of churches and religious organizations was on his radar at the time.
Okay, and we know that there have been some calls to eliminate that amendment. Do we know why that is?
Well, there is quite a vigorous movement. You see it sort of most prominently among evangelical churches that say the prohibition is a muzzle on their First Amendment rights, their freedom of religion rights, and that they should be able to endorse candidates from the pulpit. The Johnson Amendment does allow churches and pastors to preach about policies and issues. They can talk about abortion, they can talk about other controversial issues of the day, but they are not allowed to directly endorse candidates. And there is a fear that if that was to become widespread, we would see sort of the polarization that is already in so many parts of our country be exacerbated in the church pews, and that churches themselves could become sort of vehicles for money that is seeking to influence elections, but that would avoid disclosure, because obviously donations to churches are not do not have to be disclosed to the IRS.
Okay, Jeremy Schwartz, thank you so much for that insight and your time with us today.
Thank you.